Hi, Ryan Dusick. How are you?
I'm good. Thank
Welcome
you for
to the
having
show.
me.
Yes.
Honey, we have a rock star in the house.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting across from me. I hope you guys are watching this on YouTube. So before we start the interview, your first your first Instagram post was like almost exactly a year ago.
Yeah,
Is this your first Instagram account?
it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was like trying to scroll back and I'm like, that's as far as it goes. Your first post is your office man cave studio, right? Office studio man cave. Very impressive, by
Thank
the
you.
way. Very impressive. So many precious things. Like you can see them lining the walls and on stands. My question for you is, if there were a fire and you could only save one of those precious things, what would it be?
Wow. And that's a great question because there was a fire in our area a couple years ago. You
yeah.
know, the fires in the
Yeah.
valley and everything that have gotten so crazy. Of course, we have all this rain right now, which is
Right.
the opposite. But and I was starting to load up my car with anything I could grab that I thought I needed to save. I have a few vintage instruments and things, a nice 1973 Fender jazz bass that Adam Levine gave me for my 30th birthday. That was one of the things I grabbed off the wall.
Wow.
But more than that, I think probably the recordings. I have some, tapes, analog tapes of the first Cars Flowers recordings, the band that became Maroon 5. And those are things that cannot be replaced, of course.
Wow.
So
No.
that's a box of that stuff would probably be number one.
Yeah.
Grammy Awards maybe in there too.
Oh, yeah. Just a few of those. Yeah, those recordings, you need to get those duplicated and like put in some kind of storage
Archive.
vault.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You'd think I would have done that by now, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
now we got rain, so you have some time.
Sure.
Some
Yeah.
time. Thank you for that. I am Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, co-host, producer, is that right?
That's
My
everything.
boyfriend, producer, and co-host,
I'm-
Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hi, Hun. So, like I said, we are talking to Ryan Dusick. He is the founding member of Maroon 5. He's also associate. So, tell me this: is it associate marriage and family therapist?
Got it.
Yes.
Right on.
And author of Harder to Breathe, a memoir of making Maroon 5, losing it all, and finding recovery. So, just from that title alone, we have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, there's some space between founder and
Yeah.
therapist.
Yes,
Sure.
yes. So we're going to actually start at the beginning, and sometimes I jump right into the meat of it, but we're going to start at the beginning because it's such a good story. You grew up here in LA, right? On
Yeah.
the west side.
Yeah.
Jewish dad, Mexican mom.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice combination.
It's unique.
Yeah. You describe yourself from the beginning as an outsider, right? An anxious kid. You found an outlet in pitching, pitching baseball.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to talk to me about that anxiety, the apartness, and then what pitching meant to you then.
I think my earliest experiences with anxiety, which I wouldn't have that word for it at the time when I was a kid, would be that I was a very shy kid. You know, I remember walking into even family gatherings as a little boy and holding on to my mom's leg. You know, I was a mama's boy.
Yeah.
And very, very close with her, and she was my security blanket in those situations, right? But overall, I felt like I was a happy kid. I mean, my childhood, when I look back, if anything, I think of it as perfect in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Which, as we know, nothing is ever perfect. But in my mind, it was, at least in my memory, it's like this idealized childhood. I had friends, and I felt relatively good. But if you put me in new social situations, I was very uncomfortable, and I didn't acclimate well to new social groups. And then as a teenager, it became more pronounced because I was very self-conscious and going through growing pains. But baseball was the one place as a kid growing up, being on the mound as a pitcher, especially around age 12 when I kind of reached my peak at the end of Little League, where I felt total confidence. I just really felt like with a ball in my hand, I can do exactly what I want with it, and anyone who faced me, I could strike out. And that was a powerful feeling. You know, that was the place where whatever meekness I had elsewhere in my life was gone.
Right.
And I don't know where that came from exactly, how I had that confidence in that context. But it certainly was I mean, I look back now, all the things that I've done in my life, including touring with Maroon 5 and all that stuff, being on the mound at age 12 and striking people out and winning the championship is probably still my favorite memory.
Really?
I think so.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. You're tall. How tall are you?
6'2.5". Like
And were you a tall kid?
Yeah, I was always at the 99th percentile growing up.
Yeah.
I hit 6 feet right when I started high school, I think.
That's good for pitchers, right? To
Yeah.
be long.
Long
Yeah.
legs, long
Yeah.
arms, a lot of levers. Yeah, so I was a little bit, I had that advantage, I think, just in terms of growing early. I definitely was a head taller than a lot of the other 12-year-olds, so that helped.
You stopped pitching. Why?
Well, I had injuries that ended my dream of pitching for the Dodgers someday, which was really sad. It was my first real passion and first real talent I felt that I had. And given how much I had excelled at an early age, I think it was realistic that I maybe could pitch in college and, eventually get to that point. See, you never know how far you're going to go, but that was at least the dream, right? It was a series of things that happened, starting with breaking my hand when I was about 13, 14 years old, having a cast on, and then going back to pitch a little too quickly after that, and not taking the time to build my arm back up. So
can you say why you went back to pitch a little too quickly?
Because, I was just very anxious to get back because I loved it, for one. Number two, I had teammates that I didn't want to let down. I had been pitching in the first half of that year for the junior high school, and we were going into the playoffs and everything when I broke my hand, so it was very disappointing when I had to sit out, and I was the starting pitcher of the team and everything, and everyone was disappointed. And then there was one guy on my team, and the varsity head coach told me that I was a wimp because I didn't put a soft cast instead of a hard cast on and continue to play first base. And I was like, I have a broken hand. Do you want me to go? And that wasn't even really an option. So I think I internalized that a little bit. I felt like, oh, I'm being a wimp. I got to get back out there as soon as possible. And the next season, the senior league season started right then. And I came back right into it and just started pitching immediately. I don't think anyone could have stopped me. I was just gangbusters,
Well, it was, as reading the book, I was really interested in that because I felt like, especially now having finished it, that play through the pain thing was ingrained in you then. Once you saw the response from the people around you who were counting on you, I'm putting that in air quotes, you felt that obligation to step up, and regardless of how you had been told to care for yourself with this, you decided to not let them down, right?
Yeah, I did. And it's interesting because, I look back and my parents didn't put a lot of pressure on me. They weren't like, you got to do this, you got to do that. They encouraged me to do things, and they were very congratulatory when I would excel at something. So I think it was probably a lot of positive reinforcement in terms of I started pushing myself to excel at things and to be the best because I liked that response. But I didn't feel a lot of external pressure. It started to become more an internal pressure.
Okay.
But then when you get to a certain level, and there are certain expectations externally from people, and there was that feeling inside of I don't want to let people down.
Yeah.
I don't want to disappoint.
Yeah, you write your book is so detailed and so honest. We just talked about that honesty that you wanted to stick to in the book. Talk to me about when Adam Levine first appears in your life, because to me, you guys are like frenemies throughout the book.
You could say that.
And so, but talk about when you guys were kids and he first appears and what that was like.
I met Adam through a family friend. The Salzman family was close to us. Manny Salzman went to high school with my dad, and they'd been friends for a long time. Fred Levine was a friend of Manny Salzman. So all the kids knew each other. Adam Salzman, Adam Levine, and me. it wasn't a close friendship or anything. He was a couple years younger than me, and as a kid, he just seemed like an annoying little brother to me.
Yeah.
Very rambunctious, kind of an ADD kid, and we actually tried to start a band when I was 12 and he was about 10 or 11. When I just started playing the drums and he had just started playing the guitar. Adam Salzman was the kind of precocious kid that was trying to put together a band. He had been playing guitar a couple of years. And we had a couple band rehearsals in my parents' garage at that time. I didn't know Adam could sing. He was just this meek little boy in the corner strumming a rhythm guitar. But we played like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times together, and that was that. And then we went our separate ways. I was playing in the school band for a couple of years. I joined my older brother's band. I was playing in clubs around town for the first time when I was 14, 15 years old.
Like the Troubadour.
The Troubadour,
Yeah.
the Whiskey, the
Yeah.
Roxy.
Which, just for anybody who doesn't live in LA, these are adult clubs. They were known for rock and roll they were just known for music, actually. If you wanted to hear good music and you were able to get in, you were in for a show. And you were a kid. I had to read that part twice because you were 13, 14.
Yeah, well, something had happened in the 80s at the Sunset Strip where, because there was this rich history there of, the 60s and 70s rock and folk artists that played there, Jimi Hendrix and Cream and, Crosby, Stills and Nash, all those great LA and otherwise bands that came through town and played on the Strip. At some point, I think these clubs realized they could make a lot of money if they did the pay-to-play thing. I don't know if you're familiar with that, what that means exactly, but basically they book like 8 bands every night, and all they have to do is buy their tickets from the club and then sell them themselves. So the club knows they're going to make their money. They've already made it,
right.
And then they're going to make the money on the drink sales and stuff. But they made it all ages instead of 21 and over, so that any high school band could book themselves and buy 200 tickets and try to sell it to their family and friends. So it lost a little bit of its luster, the glamour of the Sunset Strip, because it was just basically this pay-to-play thing. But it still had all that history, and it still had that mystique. And we were playing what felt like very grown-up clubs. It was just filled with high school kids and parents, basically.
Yeah. So you're playing in this band with your brother, pay to play, and then what happens after that?
So my brother and his friends and the other guys that were older than me in the school band all go off to college, and I was very sad and feeling very lonely, and all the people that I had kind of learned how to play in a band with were gone.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for people to play with, and I wanted to start my own band. And I was kind of the elder statesman of the school band at that point. And then I realized that Adam Levine was a freshman. I was starting my junior year at that point. And I was like, oh yeah, he plays some rhythm guitar, and he had joined the school band. And then I went to go see Adam Salzman's band, who Adam Levine was playing rhythm guitar in at the Troubadour one night. And I was just going there just to kind of scoff at this rival band.
Right.
They're like, oh, these kids, they think they're great, and my band was better. And they were pretty good. They were a tight band. They were definitely putting on a show. And Adam was just, again, kind of meekly strumming a rhythm guitar, stage left. But for the last song, they asked him to come to center stage to sing a song. And he sang the first couple lines of Rockin' Robin. And my jaw dropped, and I was like, okay. He was like 13, 14 years old at that point.
Right.
And he had a very unique voice, and it was on key, which is saying a lot at that age. And I thought to myself right in that moment, like, whatever I'm going to do with a band going forward, that's what I want it to be. I want that to be the focal point. I knew that he didn't have a lot of experience and he was kind of shy, but I also knew that finding a voice that was unique, that could carry a song, was the hardest thing to find when you're starting a band. There's a lot of guitarists and bass players and drummers.
Right.
So that was all I knew. And then I found out when we started the school year that he had already started this other band with Jesse and Mickey, who he met in middle school. And they had another drummer that they were playing with, and they were kind of courting me in PE class. Jesse was like following me around when we were doing laps around the basketball court, and just pestering me like a excited little puppy, like, you need to join our band, like, we're really good, and all this stuff. And I just kind of, I mean, these guys have been playing guitar for like a few months, you know,
Right,
and I was
right.
like, what? I'm going to
Like
start
what band? Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I had been playing with older guys, you know, experienced musicians on stages already at that point. And so I just kind of played aloof and a little cool, knowing that I wanted to start a band with Adam, but not knowing if these other guys were really up to snuff. But then we had one day in the orchestra room at Brentwood High School when we were running through a song for a pep rally. We were doing Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name.
And just like kind of a side note, when you say school band, this was a really like progressive band, right? This wasn't like a band that where you played just classics or classical music, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there was the orchestra, and that was a more traditional thing.
Yeah.
But that was just one class, and they did like 1 or 2 performances a year. But then the pep band was this really
pep band, that's right.
the
Yeah.
school pep band. This really cool teacher, Mr. Castaneras, who was the middle school history teacher. And he would like rap his lessons and stuff. He was kind of like an older. He wasn't that old, I guess, at that point. He was probably 40 at that point. But he was a hippie guy from the 60s and 70s rock era.
Yeah.
And he started the pep band because he wanted the kids to have a fun outlet for music, something more contemporary and rock and roll.
Yeah.
And so that was just the coolest thing for me and my brother, you know, at Brentwood School, which was a very college prep environment. There was a lot of emphasis put on, you know, going to Ivy League schools and, you know, making a lot of money and being a donor, you know?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
But, you know, the arts were not an emphasis. And so, you know, being able to go into this group with Mr. C, as we called him, and learn classic rock songs. And then he even allowed us to just do our own thing and do contemporary or originals.
Rage Against the Machine.
And Rage Against the Machine, you know, it was the early 90s. It was the era of grunge and hard rock. And Rage Against the Machine had just come out with their first album. They were one of my favorite bands at that point. Tool, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana,
Yeah.
Smashing Pumpkins, Red Hot Chili Peppers. Those were my favorite bands. And I found kindred spirits in Adam, Jesse, and Mickey. They were kind of into the same music and very much of that generation. Mm-hmm. When I was playing on the Sunset Strip before that, a lot of the other bands were still the hair bands, you know, the hair metal bands of the late 80s.
Yeah.
It was kind of the death rattle of that scene. And I really felt like I was of the next generation, which was the alternative rock generation.
Right. Well, you were.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're so annoyed with him, Adam, for so much of this, but you really seem to love him, like right from the gate.
Yeah.
Like that keeps shining through.
Yeah.
You described yourself as Felix and Oscar. Can you just talk about that and what that means for people who don't know who the Odd Couple are either?
Yeah, well, I tried to walk that line in the book with my relationship with him because it was a love and frustration relationship for a long time, you know, more love than anything else. You know, we're brothers, you know, to this day, but we're very different. We're almost like opposite personalities in some ways. Maybe in some ways we're similar, and that could be part of the reason why we could frustrate each other too. But in some very specific ways, we were kind of polar opposites in the Odd Couple sort of way. In that I'm a meticulous guy, perfectionistic by nature, kind of a control freak. My room is very neat. My drum set is very neat. I would get very sort of frazzled when things were left undone in some way, and wanted to exert some control over, you know, how everything was going to be. Adam, it was like an ADHD kid, kind of hyperactive, very impulsive. You know, he just has an idea and just wants to do it, and then super focused on that, but distracted from everything else.
Right.
You know, you'd be talking to him about one thing, and then he'd get another idea, and then it was gone, and you were, you know, not able to focus on what you had been doing. And then there were things like just very practical things around the house. Like he would go into the fridge and pull out a Coke and open it up.
I laughed at this.
And take a sip and then put it down on the counter somewhere. And then we'd go about whatever we were doing. He would forget that he took that can out and go get another one and open it. And why would I care? These are my parents' money, you know, it's a can of soda, but there would be like 5 cans of soda left open with 1 or 2 sips out of them all over the house.
Right.
And I would just like, you know.
Yes. Yeah, you're like simmering to a boil while all this is happening. It's really great in the book because, again, there's that love, but it's also like come on, man.
Right.
There are 5 full cans of soda here.
Well, I think at times I had to discern with him how much of it was just, a lack of ability to maintain attention or focus on things, which it obviously was mostly that. And how much of it was like being inconsiderate, because I took it as you're being inconsiderate.
Right.
I took it personally, like you're selfish.
Yeah.
And so that's where the frustration came from. I understood later and better, and now as a mental health professional, I understand ADHD a lot better, and see it for what it was more clearly. But it was just we were like Felix and Oscar, and I was cleaning up after him all the time.
Right. I know. I love that juxtaposition of your 2 personalities, and the kind of love bond that kept you together, not just for each other, but for the music you were making and for the goal ahead.
Yeah.
Like you guys needed each other then. So talk to me. Is Cara's Flowers?
Cara's Flowers, yeah.
Talk to me about Cara's Flowers. And how old were you all? Can you give me all your ages then?
Well, we started the band in February of 1994, which would have made me 16, and the other guys 14 going on 15.
Right.
And we started it in my parents' garage, the four original members. And we were very much a grunge band when we started it, an alternative rock band, heavily influenced by Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all that stuff, Alice in Chains. And Adam, it's funny because his voice is not very well suited to that style of music. And if you listen to the recordings that we did, he was trying his best to sing like an octave lower than his range.
Oh, boy.
In the Eddie Vedder sort of style, who was his hero. And so it sounds kind of funny, and it certainly wasn't the right sound for us. But at the same time, it was very expressive. I mean, if you look at the live shows, we were way beyond our years in terms of the level of energy and volume that we created. That was my main goal, really, in putting that band together. I just wanted to make a lot of noise.
Yeah. And then the name.
Yeah, Cara's Flowers.
Yeah.
So Cara was a girl in their class at Brentwood, a freshman when I was a junior. And one of the perks of being friends with these guys is that they had some cute friends, right? Yes. And I was this shy guy who had not really dated at all at that point. I hadn't dated at all at that point. Yeah. And the girls in my class, I thought, had just given up on me completely because I was shy and they were dating older guys. And just as it goes, I was like, maybe the most logical thing for me to do is date a girl that's like a year or 2 younger than me. So I had my eyes on this girl, Cara. I thought she was very cute, and I knew she was friends with Adam. They had gone to elementary school together and stuff. And the night that we started the band, we were at the Troubadour, and then we ended up back in my bedroom at my parents' house, and we were starting to write a song and starting to just fantasize about what the band was going to be. And it was like midnight. My parents were already asleep. And Adam says, "This night isn't over, man. We gotta cap this night off with something epic." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" Of course, this is his impulsivity and just like wanting to do something and then getting fixated on it. And I was a good boy. Like I had never snuck out and done anything bad. I always did what was responsible.
Yeah.
But he's like, let's go. It's Cara's birthday tomorrow. Let's go knock on her window and wake her up and wish her happy birthday after midnight. And I'm like, eesh, I don't know if I'm okay with that. And I was the one with the car, of course. I was 16 and had my hand-me-down Jeep Wagoneer in the driveway. But he convinced me, and we put it in neutral and pushed it down onto the street so that my parents wouldn't hear the engine revving. And then we got in it, and I started it, and we headed into the Hollywood Hills. One thing we didn't realize is that Adam, was sure he knew where her house was, somewhere above the whiskey in the Hollywood Hills, but he didn't know where it was exactly. So we actually had to sneak back into the house to get the school roster, to get her address. Still couldn't find it, so then we had to get a Thomas guide, which is,
you explain what a Thomas guide is.
You love the Thomas guide.
I do.
You do.
The Thomas guide, of course, was before. This is long before we had, a map in our pocket, which a digital map, which or GPS. It was just a paper map with all of the streets and everything in LA, and you had to look for the street you were looking for.
Yep. And you like pull over under like a street light.
Right. So, but we finally. Before we ended up at her house at like 4 a.m, we were eating French toast at Norm's on La Cienega Boulevard.
Norm's.
Yeah.
Shout out to
Norm's. And this guy at 2 and 3 in the morning is walking down the street selling flowers, which was strange. But we took it as a sign. So
course.
we went and bought a bouquet of flowers. We finally found her house at like 4 a.m. We knocked on her window. She was very surprised and a little dumbfounded, but I think flattered.
Yeah.
And we gave her flowers, and so we went back home and snuck back in and said, we got to name our band Cara's Flowers to cap this night.
I love that. I want to talk just a little bit about your shoulder injury. Was that the same injury that you carried in with you to that was your injury during drumming? Did it start then?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, when you were pitching is what I meant.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, I looked at it at that point. I was like, oh no, this thing is coming back. That was really only one factor. Mm-hmm. It was a big factor, I think, at the time, but understanding more now, I think that it was probably 50% physical and 50% psychological, the breakdown that happened to me physically. Mm. And yeah, I did have a pitching injury, but of course for however many years, from age 13, 14 to age 25, 26, when I was on the road promoting Songs About Jane, it had never really bothered me drumming. Right. Granted, we had never played that much, that long, sustaining a tour on that level before. So that was a relatively new idea. And then we were headlining, and that's when things escalated to becoming a problem for me. But it was partly that. It was an existing injury. It was also largely the fact that I had never really learned proper technique. I was self-taught, and there were definitely gaps in terms of the proper way to manipulate drumsticks to not injure yourself. But then there was the other psychological element where, because I didn't have those fundamentals, I had imposter syndrome. I felt like once we got to that level where I'm surrounded by people that are high caliber musicians, trained musicians, not just like really successful bands, but like artists that had musicians that were trained at Juilliard and at Berklee School of Music and stuff like that. So when you're surrounded by that, and your identity has always been a garage rocker, basically, who just kind of fumbled around and found this sound with the band of brothers in your parents' garage. It's easy to feel a little out of place and maybe I don't belong here. And all that internal pressure that I put on myself kind of started to intersect with the external pressures of the level that we were at that point, and the demands that were being placed on us in promoting this, what was now a hit. So I think that all kind of, collided at that moment in my life. And there was the tangible organic element, but there was my nervous system, really, my whole constitution kind of breaking down. And that led to what became nerve injury, but also just nerve dysfunction, like an inability to coordinate things that had once been easy for me to coordinate. And just getting through a show was becoming more and more difficult. It's complicated, and it's almost hard to understand still to this day. I have a much better understanding of it myself than I did then. And what was so hard about it at the time was that because I didn't understand it, but I did have this deep down feeling that there was something wrong with me, that there was something defective in me. And it was like, it's not just physical. There's something to my core that can't hack it, that can't handle this level of pressure and performance that is being asked of us at this point. So it not only hurt me physically, but it hurt me down to my spirit.
Yeah.
Kind of broke me.
We were watching, hon, you have to help me remember the name of the documentary. You know what I'm talking about? With Kyrgios, the tennis player.
The tennis
last
documentary.
Night. It's on Netflix now. And it's different. It starts with him, and he doesn't. Do you know who he is? I think it's Nick Kyrgios, and he's Australian. He's like the bad boy of tennis.
Yeah, he made it to the semifinals of the U.S. Open this past summer, and he was like he knocked the biggest seats in the tournament out. He's done it. He's like the only guy who's ever done that.
And he is unorthodox. He doesn't train. He doesn't have a coach.
He walked into
yells.
the Australia.
Yeah,
he walked into the Australia Open without playing for like 11 weeks or 12 weeks with his girlfriend.
With his girlfriend, who he just met online, but he was saying one of the reasons that he doesn't keep that rigorous schedule that his competitors do is because of his mental health. And I thought that was really interesting because I was throwing a lot of shade in his direction just from the TV watching it, thinking this guy's not wearing, proper tennis attire. He's not respecting the umpires. He's not respecting the game. But the way that he approached it is that he had to put his mental health first. Because obviously there had been something that had gone on with him. He didn't talk about what that was, but he knew that he couldn't handle it. And I actually flash back to your book because so much of what you write about, kind of in retrospect now, right, is what you just said. Yeah. That deep core knowledge that there was something else, that it wasn't just the physical injury, there was something else. And do you think that part of that, the something else was your OCD? Do you think that compelled you to continue even without the proper training, because you were so talented. You are so talented. And so that feels like it should be enough, right?
Yeah.
And you're looking around, like you said, at all these like classically trained musicians and you're competing with them. How did you soothe yourself then? How did you quiet the nerves, the thoughts of not being enough?
Well, I didn't have a whole lot of tools at that point, and that was part of the problem. I was just kind of taking the attitude of just, bear down and get through it, basically. Just push it down, just try harder. That was the technique, try harder. There's a chapter in my book, Harder to Breathe, called Try Harder. And I didn't realize that that's common. I was just talking about myself in that was, the attitude that I took. It was like, I've excelled all my life. When I apply myself, I can do well. And when the tough gets going, you got to just try harder. And I was talking to another musician recently who actually had a story, not exactly like mine, but the breakdown that he experienced was similar. And he described something called musician's dystonia or focal dystonia, which is basically, it's like in sports, they call it the yips.
Yes.
Like when you've done something your entire life and it's very easy, but then all of a sudden your body or your nervous system just decides we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And you just
Simone Biles had that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was so interesting to see how people reacted to that and the mental health issue that was going on there and the fact that people were supportive of her stepping away at some people were. I'm sure some people were not. Yes. But talk about on the world's biggest stage, the Olympics, So I related to him. I hadn't heard it described in that way, and now I've been referring to it more now as musician's dystonia. But he used that phrase. He was telling me his story, and he said, for the longest time, I just thought I needed to try harder. And I was like, holy crap. Like, that's a chapter in my book, and I was just talking about myself. I was not referring to any, larger description of mental health in this context. And then I realized that the try harder is part of the problem. When faced with the obstacle, you're trying to push through it harder. And for me, that meant bearing down more. I was grabbing the sticks harder, trying to aim, literally trying harder. And my whole nervous system was going into fight or flight was what was happening. I was tense and I was fighting for my life, really. And when you're doing that on a nightly basis, and drumming is something that's supposed to be fluid and organic and rhythmic, it takes its toll on your nervous system, but also it starts to take its toll on your joints and your nerves and everything that allows you to coordinate those things. Yeah. So it just became like a vicious cycle of like, it got worse, so I tried harder, and that made it worse, and then so I tried harder, and it just kept getting worse and worse.
Well, and you're breathing this really rare air at this point, because as a reader, I'm rooting for you to make it to wherever the band is going, because the band's like a rocket ship, right? Like it's going up and up and up and up, and you're a huge part of that. It's the 5 of you. You each have a role, which is very defined and distinct. And it felt like it was a race between you getting to the stardom that you deserved with the band that you founded and your injury and succumbing to your injuries, right? I wanted to talk about that conversation that was led by Adam, where they sit down and tell you that you have to step back. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was a really difficult moment in my life, and I chose it to start my book as the prologue, the first chapter, because it felt like that was the pivotal moment in my life. There was everything before it and everything after. And I also just thought it was a nice sort of narrative device for it to be a bit of a cliffhanger to start the book. It's like, how did it get to that, and where does it go from there? So, it wasn't something that was a surprise. It was something that in some ways I felt like I had willed it to happen, in my negative forecasting, in the pressure I'd put on myself, and then going down with injury and feeling like a failure. I had a premonition, and I had this sort of image of this is going to happen. This is the way it's going to end. It's all going to end badly for me. And so it in some ways it felt like it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. But it was a conversation we weren't having, right? It was the elephant in the room. I was going out on tour with them. We were doing all the promo and everything for this record that was now a multi-platinum success. We were going to the Grammy Awards. We were doing all the stuff that you do when you cross
over. This was Songs About Jane.
Songs About Jane, yeah. And it was 4 years or 5 years at that point into the touring and promotional campaign for that album. And I had been home, trying to nurse my injuries for like a year at that point. And then it was time to start making another album was what it was. And we were at the Houdini Mansion in Laurel Canyon, recording demos and stuff. And I showed up and tried to play, and it was just not really working. And so, they called this meeting in the dining room of the Houdini Mansion. And, basically they said, like, look, even if you could get through the making of this album, we're going to have a world tour booked after that. And the same thing's probably going to happen. And then what are we going to do? We're going to have to cancel the world tour and try to find a drummer. So I understood. I mean, at that point it was big business, and they had to move forward with their career. But of course, I was heartbroken, and it was more than just losing a career or this band that was, so big at that point. I was losing what felt like my identity, my entire self-definition. Had been invested in being, a member of this band. We had built this thing off the ground. We're 12 years into it at this point, from my parents' garage to the biggest stages in the world. And on top of that, it's my best friends. These are the guys that I had been so close with since age 16. I'm now 28. And then my entire social sort of sphere, everything around the band, my college friends, my Hollywood friends, everyone was the band was at the center of all that. So having to step away from that felt like I really was losing everything that was defining of me. And I just didn't even know who I was at that point, or where I would go, or what I would do with my life.
Yeah. You describe that so well in the book. It's... And the journey that you take us on, the stakes are so high at that point. And then the reader, or I as the reader, understood what was inevitable, like you just described, but was still kind of hoping there was a way, there was a workaround of some kind.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit, or you're going to talk a little bit about, it felt like alcohol went from being a special guest star in your life, the occasional, to becoming like the star. Not right then, but after that. Can you tell me about that time in your life when that shift occurred for you?
Yeah, that's an accurate way to describe it. Alcohol in my 20s became something that was just facilitating good times with my friends. It was something I did socially. I would say I drank the way a lot of people in college do. We would go out a couple nights a week, and you get drunk, to the point of drunkenness. But I don't remember getting sick or having it affect my life in a really negative way at that point. And I carried that with me on the road. It was the kind of thing where you ask about coping skills or things to blow off steam. Certainly if we had a night off, I wanted to go to a college bar or something and get a pitcher of beer and just let loose. But it wasn't the kind of thing where I was drunk on stage every night or hungover every day or anything like that. But it probably was detrimental still, even because it was something I was leaning on to blow off steam. And if I had had better techniques of self-care at that point, maybe it would have helped a little better. But what happened was I went through this really dark time in my life. I had this loss. I look at it now as a grieving process I had to go through, losing that whole part of my identity. And the shift happened where alcohol went from being a way to facilitate good times to being a way to cope with pain, an escape. And even to the point of like, I would step into like an alter ego of sorts when I was drinking, like pretending like everything was great. Like I'm just a rock star, just living a crazy life, and anyone would want to live the way that I do. Going out and just partying like crazy and having no responsibilities and no commitments to anything. And it got pretty crazy pretty quick. In the first year or two after I left the band, it was my drinking was definitely out of control. I had a few friends and family members tell me they were worried about me and stuff. And what happened was another phase that I think a lot of alcoholics can relate to is that I made a decision to kind of get my shit together. Mm-hmm. And I was able to. I mean, I would take breaks from drinking, and I would, try to only drink wine or only drink beer or only drink on the weekends or whatever it was that felt like control over the substance and my use of it. When in reality, looking back, that's an illusion.
Right.
And that's another chapter in my book, The Illusion of Control, which is a common thing that we experience in with substance abuse. And I used that to rationalize my drinking for years, thinking I have this under control because I can stop whenever I want. I just have a lifestyle that most people don't have because of my past and having made some money and, having a lack of responsibility that most people would dream of having. Yeah. But it all caught up with me, as it always does. And it got worse and worse to the point where I didn't have any control anymore. At the end of my drinking, it became something that was really dark. It was, whatever control I had thought I had was gone. And I was now completely in the grips of this addiction. And thank God I had a bit of a moment of clarity where I realized, if I keep going this direction, it's just going to keep getting worse. And it's already pretty bad. And the only hope that I have is just to start walking in the other direction and humbly, ask for help and surrender to some kind of process of recovery.
Well, and I love, before you surrender for the final time, you go to what I call celebrity rehab too, which is AKA the Pasadena Recovery Center. Right. But I love that show, Celebrity Rehab. I watched it all the time. And that's where they took care of people in that anyway. But that was the facility. And you go there, and two things that struck me happen. One, you see people who were like really bad off. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I'm not like that, right? So you can immediately separate yourself from them. Mm-hmm. And the other is they detox you from the alcohol using benzos, like Valium or Klonopin or Ativan or anything in that nature. And you get the brilliant idea after you leave that you can do that for yourself. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, aren't addicts clever?
Yes, very. I was like, wow, that's smart. So yeah, tell me.
Yeah, well, in some ways it was a good experience. I think I was there for 3 or 4 weeks, and it was a wake up call in some ways because I really dried out for the first time in some time at that point, and I noticed that my social skills had diminished because I had been isolating so much, and just being in the sort of hustle bustle of every day, having to be up at 7 a.m. and eat breakfast with everyone and go to meet whatever we were doing. We had something to do every hour. Yeah. And there were AA meetings at night. And then, we had a bedtime, like having that structure in my life for the first time in a while, it made me realize how much I'd been missing in terms of that. But I also picked up some other things hanging out with addicts and realizing like, oh, it's a lot easier to deal with the withdrawal when you have some benzos. Mm-hmm. And that's what they give you in the hospital when you're detoxing and everything. Right. And so somehow along, those lines, I decided, I just need a good psychiatrist to prescribe me anti-anxiety medication, which is what benzos are classified as. And that way, that'll help me curb my drinking. I don't have to quit drinking. Right. I can just
control it.
I can control it.
Yes.
Here's another mechanism of control, right? And I don't think it surprised anyone that didn't turn out real well.
Right.
I just ended up in a different and in a lot of ways worse cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
Where I would go from these alcoholic benders, which got worse, and more longer and more intense, to like, because I knew like, oh, well, when I stop, I have this pill I can take to help me deal with the hangover or the withdrawal. And then I'd go for a few days using the pills to wean myself. I hope I'm not giving anyone any ideas.
Well, I was also going to say the reason that they give you benzos when you are withdrawing from alcohol, so you don't die.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
It's
They're
not
anti-seizure.
because they want to make you more comfortable necessarily. It's anti-seizure. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was just this miserable back and forth, basically withdrawing from alcohol and then withdrawing from benzos. And at the end of that, when it really reached its fever pitch, it was just constant anxiety.
Yeah.
It was like anxiety, pass out. Anxiety, pass out. That was my entire existence. And I had nothing really to look forward to. And so at a certain point, hopefully as I did, you get to a point where you realize this is no way to live. And this will lead to the hospital or death.
Yeah.
And I chose the hospital. I said, you know what? I want to return to the living. I want to have a life that I didn't know what that would be. And I had no idea what that would look like, or it was terrifying, just making that choice and very humbling. But I knew that there was more in life for me than just that existence. And that, I was, as cliche as it sounds, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. So you went to the hospital. You were really messed up. Mm-hmm. Like you thought you were close to seizing. Like you kind of alerted people that you might be close to a seizure.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like you were very mobile, like you moved around very well.
Yeah.
Was it weird being a celebrity in rehab?
I didn't think of myself as a celebrity at that point. I thought of myself as somebody who had like 15 minutes of relative fame, but I had been in a band behind Adam Levine, who was the star. If you had been a Maroon 5 fan during the Songs About Jane era, then you might have recognized me. But so I wasn't somebody that I walked in and everyone immediately recognized me. Although, of course, within due time, pretty soon, everyone knew my background and stuff.
Maroon 5, yeah.
Yeah, and I was at the Betty Ford Center, so that wasn't exactly a place where people were like awestruck by somebody that was but yeah, I mean, it was, look, at that point in my life, I was just a guy with a bad drinking problem trying to get help, and very grateful to be where I was and getting the help that I was getting, which was not the case for everyone there. And that was interesting and a great lesson for me too, because there were people there that were 10 years deeper into their addiction than me and literally dying of it, needed a liver. My roommate needed a liver. And he was going to die. He needed to get on a transplant list, and he was not sober. And I knew that the second he got out of there, he was going to start drinking and using again. And it was like, wow. I mean, that could be me in another 10 years or sooner. And like, that's how powerful this disease is. I mean, these people like still are in denial.
Yeah. One of the scenes I loved while you were there, and just this is another shift, was you still have your anxiety, right? You no longer have what you used to medicate it, which actually made you more anxious, as you just described. Mm-hmm. And in treatment, and when you go to especially 12-step treatment, you're asked to speak sometimes, right? To share your story. Mm-hmm. And they ask you to share from the podium at some point, and you're given all this support, right? Like, you can do it, Ryan. Go up there, Ryan. But I felt like the shift occurred while you realized after you and you were still nervous. Mm-hmm. You were still anxious as you were talking. But at some point you realized that service is not the antidote for it, but it helps. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, before I found that it was helpful, I didn't understand why service was such a big part of recovery in the 12 steps or otherwise. But it hit me really early on when I was at Betty Ford, because even 2 weeks in, I could help someone who was just checking in with their bags to their room and acclimate them to the process and tell them it's going to be okay, even if they're shaking like a leaf and terrified like I was 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. that was a powerful feeling, because when you're in your addiction, you don't have any sense of purpose. You know, your purpose, your higher power, as we say, is your substance. Your entire day revolves around, how am I feeling and how much of this substance do I need to feel okay, right? Being of service to another human being, having some purpose in the world, is the furthest thing from your mind.
Yes.
And your spirit is really suffering for that reason. So it serves a couple purposes. One is it gives you that sense of fulfillment, but it also gets you out of yourself, because, you know, addiction's also a disease of self-obsession. And when you're able to show up for another human being and be present with another human being in a real, meaningful way, you're getting out of that self-obsession. And so that's really helpful for somebody who is as anxious as I was.
Yeah.
Because, you know, feeling anxious, you're very consumed, very self-conscious. And when you're thinking about someone else, you're not as self-conscious.
Yeah. Which I'm assuming led you to become a therapist. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was a logical thing. It was just kind of one step. They tell you to put one foot in front of the other each day and just do the next indicated action. And I did that for a couple years. When I got out of Betty Ford, I went into an IOP, an intensive outpatient program, for a few months. When I graduated there, I volunteered there. They asked me to stay on as a volunteer, which I considered a big compliment, you know, to be 6 months sober and have something to offer the newcomers just by telling my story or giving them some direction and articulating ideas of recovery. And I was getting a lot of positive feedback doing that. And it was, my confidence had been shattered by everything that happened. And for years my self-esteem was very low. And so for the first time in a long time, I was realizing I had some talents, things that I had forgotten that I had, in terms of just my intellect and my ability to articulate ideas and things like that, but also new skills that I had learned in the process of recovery that I could actually use to help people. And I was like, just a light bulb went on one day. I was like, I should be doing this for a career. Yeah. It's fulfilling. I'm good at it. People are giving me good feedback, and I'm helping people. There's an altruistic element to this. It's not just, you know, entertaining anymore.
Right.
It's doing something meaningful beyond, well, not that entertaining isn't meaningful. I don't mean to.
No, but it was different for you.
It was different.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. And so I just, I started looking around, and I applied to a couple graduate programs, and a month later I was studying to start, you know, to get my master's in clinical psychology and become a therapist.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Two things, because we have to wrap up. I love the scene with you playing softball with your dad. Like, just that kind of wraparound to your pitching days and what that felt like and how important that was for you, and that you still have this bond with your family, who obviously loves you through this whole thing. The other thing is, and I didn't get to talk about this at all, you're in a relationship almost this whole book. And I told you at the end of the book, I was a little unclear as to whether or not you were still together. And the answer is,
we are still together.
Yes, you're still together.
Yeah.
Which is really cool, because you guys were really young when you met. And obviously you went through a lot, which means that your partner went through a lot. And it's just really cool, Ryan, your whole journey. I'm feeling very cut off now. Like, I want it to go longer, but we're at time. Just really, really quickly, tell me, why did you write the book?
Well, I wrote the book. Actually, I had thought about writing the book years ago, when I was still struggling. And I knew I had a unique story, and I had, you know, the story of the band, forming the band, and everything we had done, which had been unique. And then everything that had happened for me was unique. However, I didn't really know what the purpose of telling that story would be at the time, because it was just kind of sad. It would end sad. And then all of a sudden I'm in recovery, and I'm in grad school studying psychology, and I have this whole new perspective on mental health, my mental health, and how I'm being of service to others. And I'd been telling my story in meetings and at the recovery center, and writing self-reflection papers in school about my own mental health. And it was another one of those just light bulb moments where it was like, I'd always dreamed of writing a book, and now I have a purpose for writing the book. It's to tell a story that's hopeful and that can inspire people to see themselves in my struggle and in my recovery. And so it just lit a fire under me. I was like, there's so many reasons why I want to do this right now. And I just woke up one day and it started coming out of me. And I just knew it was something I needed to do. It was the next logical step in a lot of ways. It was the next indicated action for me. It was almost like the next level of my own therapy, writing the book, because it really was, I had to go to a really deep place to write the book. I wanted it to be very honest and very vulnerable. I figured if people are going to relate to it, it has to be 100% genuine. And so it required me to go to some really dark places. And in a lot of ways, writing that and then writing the end of the book, which is hopeful, gave me ultimate closure on a lot of the things that I had been struggling with. And so talking about it now, it actually lifts me up, even when I'm talking about the dark stuff, because I realize what the end of this conversation is going to be. And it's not painful to talk about the things that I struggled through, because I have this mission now that I'm on, where I'm bringing a message of hope. And so that was really what the book was, and why I feel really purposeful in not just writing it, but in promoting it.
That's amazing. I'm stealing some of that from you. That was really good. Tell people where they can find you.
Well, I have a website, ryandusick.com, which has everything me professionally speaking, as an author and speaker and as a therapist and coach. And then Instagram is the best place, at Ryan Michael Dusick,
Yes.
Ryan_Michael_Dusick, to see a lot of, old videos and photos of the band and stuff I'm doing now, talking things like this.
Yes.
That's a good place to catch up.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so glad you came in and we got to do this in person. I'm glad you live in Los Angeles so we can make that happen. The book is called Harder to Breathe. It's out on Ben Bella.
Bella Books.
Bella Books. It's available anywhere you buy books. Yeah. Audiobook?
Audiobook is coming out next month. I already recorded it.
Excellent. So look for that. Actually, by the time you hear this, the audiobook will be out.
Sure.
So thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Dusick, and I'm the only rock star who found it harder to breathe.